little nothing. Give it back before I have you dragged out of here in front of everyone." Charlotte Whitfield's voice cut across the ballroom of the Fox Glen estate like a wine glass shattering on stone. And for one frozen second, 300 guests in black tie turned to look at the young woman in the gray housekeeping uniform standing perfectly still beside the dessert table. Naomi Hale did not drop the tray she was holding. She did not raise her voice. She set the tray down on the linen, folded her hands at her waist, and looked at the woman who had just accused her of stealing a $3.2 million emerald in front of half the donors in Virginia. The diamonds at Charlotte's throat trembled because her hands were trembling. The young housekeeper's hands did not move at all. Two of the estate security men were already crossing the marble. A county sheriff's deputy who'd been working the gala's perimeter detail stepped through the crowd, one hand drifting toward the cuffs on his belt. And Charlotte Whitfield, 46 years old, and shaking with what looked like rage and was actually something closer to terror, pointed one manicured finger and said it again, louder, so the cameras already lifting from the crowd would catch it clean. "She was in my dressing room. She took my ring. Arrest her." What Charlotte did not know, what nobody in that gilded room knew, was that the quiet woman in the gray uniform had spent 6 years of her life sitting on the other side of an interview table, watching people exactly like Charlotte explain why the math didn't add up. She used to be the one who put the handcuffs in motion, and she'd been keeping a very careful record for a long time. To pick the worst possible person to call a thief. But to understand why, you have to go back 4 months. To a cold morning in February when none of these people had ever heard her name. Naomi Hale woke at 4:40 every morning out of habit she could no longer break. The little rented house sat at the edge of Marshall, Virginia, 2 rooms and a kitchen with a stove that only fired 3 of 4 burners, and she had learned to make peace with all of it. She made her coffee strong and black, the way she'd learned in a federal field office where the pot was always burnt and nobody cared. She drank it standing at the window while the sky went from black to the color of cold iron. On the wall above the small table where she ate alone, 3 things hung in a careful row. A framed diploma, accounting and finance with honors, from a state university that had given her a scholarship a girl from her zip code wasn't supposed to win. A photograph of a younger Naomi in a navy blazer, hair pulled back, standing in front of a gold seal, the day she was sworn in as a special agent with IRS criminal investigation. And third, smaller than the others, a snapshot in a plain frame, a man with an easy grin and a treasury windbreaker holding a fishing rod, squinting into a sun that had set on him for good 2 years ago. Daniel, her husband. The job had not killed him. A drunk driver on Route 50 had done that, but the grief had finished the career that the funeral started. She'd handed in her credentials 8 months after the burial because she could not look at a fraud file without her hands going numb. She pressed 2 fingers to the glass over Daniel's face, the way she did every morning. She did not say anything. There was nothing left to say that he hadn't already heard. Then she pulled on the gray uniform, pinned her name tag, and drove the 11 miles to Fox Glen. The estate sat behind a stone wall and an iron gate, 300 acres of horse country that old money had been hoarding since before the Civil War. The main house was a brick Georgian the size of a small hotel, with a stable block, a guest cottage, a pool house, and a wine cellar that held more value in bottles than Naomi's whole street did in real estate. She had come to the job the way people come to a lot of jobs after their life falls apart, sideways and grateful for anything. A temp agency. A 6-week trial, then a permanent slot on the household staff under the estate manager, a tired, decent woman named Doris who had worked for the Whitfields for 20 years and had stopped expecting them to be kind. Naomi was good at the work, the way she had always been good at work. She noticed things. That was the trouble with a mind trained to find the thread that didn't belong. You couldn't switch it off just because you were dusting a banister instead of subpoenaing a bank. She noticed that the wine cellar inventory ledger had bottles checked out that never came back. She noticed that the estate paid 3 landscaping companies and only 1 ever showed up. She noticed by March that the Whitfields were broke. Not broke the way Naomi was broke. Broke the way the very rich go broke, quietly in 7-figure increments, behind a face that still smiled at galas. Preston Whitfield, the husband, had been the heir to a tobacco fortune and had spent 30 years proving he was a worse businessman than his father. There were second mortgages on a property that had been free and clear for a century. There were margin calls. There was a lawsuit from a hedge fund that Doris answered the door for and never spoke of again. And Charlotte, the second wife, 20 years younger than Preston, had built her entire identity on a lifestyle that the bank accounts could no longer support. Naomi knew all this, the way she knew the weather, by reading the small signs. She did not say a word. She had learned in a previous life that the most powerful thing in any room is the person who already understands what's happening and lets everyone else believe she doesn't. The other thing she noticed was the way Charlotte looked at her. It started small. A comment about how the silver had been polished, said in the tone you'd use to scold a child. A complaint lodged with Doris that the new girl made her uncomfortable, with no reason attached because none was needed. Charlotte had a way of speaking to the staff that left fingerprints. To the white girls on the household team, she was sharp. To Naomi, she was something else, something with a curl in it, a particular contempt she reserved for the one employee who met her eyes a half-second too long and did not look away fast enough. "You went to college," Charlotte said to her once, in April, standing in the doorway of the morning room while Naomi cleaned the fireplace. She said it like an accusation. "Doris told me. So why are you doing this?" "Life takes turns," Naomi said. Charlotte's eyes traveled over her. The uniform, the gloves, the bucket. "I suppose it does." And she walked out, and Naomi knelt back down to the ashes. And somewhere underneath the calm she had spent 2 years building, a very old instrument woke up and began, quietly, to take notes. By May, the estate was preparing for the thing that mattered most to Charlotte Whitfield in all the world. The Fox Glen Hunt Club Summer Gala. 300 guests. A senator. 2 museum board chairs. A photographer from a magazine that mattered. It was the night Charlotte stitched her social standing together for another year, and this year, with the money draining out of the foundation under her feet, she needed it to be perfect. She had a new gown flown in. She had the caterers from D.C., and she had taken out of the bank vault for the occasion and insured to the teeth the Whitfield emerald, a Colombian stone the size of a thumbnail wrapped in old diamonds, appraised the month before at $3 million too. The Naomi knew about the appraisal because she had filed the paperwork. She was by then doing more than housekeeping. Doris had started handing her the household accounts because the new girl was frighteningly fast with a spreadsheet and never made an error, and because Doris was 63 and tired, so it was Naomi who saw the email from the insurer. And it was Naomi who, on a Tuesday in late May, saw a second document that made her sit very still at the small desk in the staff office for almost a full minute. It was a lost notification, filed to Sterling Fidelity, the specialty carrier that covered the emerald, dated electronically 3 days before the gala, reporting the stone as missing. The gala had not happened yet. Naomi read it twice. She read it a third time. She did not print it. She did not forward it. She took out her own phone, the cheap one with the cracked corner, and she photographed the screen, and then she navigated out of the email and went back to balancing the wine ledger as if nothing had moved in her at all. But everything had moved. Because she had spent 6 years of her life learning what it looks like when someone decides to convert an object they can no longer afford to keep into cash they desperately need and frame the loss on a person no one will believe. The predated filing was the tell. You don't report a theft before it happens, unless you already know it's coming, unless you're the one bringing it. She understood, sitting at that desk, that she was very probably the person they had chosen to carry the blame, the new girl, the one with no family in town, no money for a lawyer, the wrong color skin in a county where a Whitfield's word had been law for 200 years. She understood it the way you understand the storm front, by the pressure dropping. A younger Naomi, the one with the badge, would have made calls, would have alerted somebody, frozen something, moved first. The Naomi who had buried her husband and learned the hardest lesson grief teaches, that you cannot stop a thing by shouting at it, did something else. She started keeping everything, every email, screenshotted to a cloud account no one at Fox Glen knew existed, every overheard conversation, logged with a date. She bought a second phone, prepaid, and learned again how to leave it recording in a breast pocket the way she used to wear a wire, and she waited. because she had learned that the moment you let a careful liar know you see them, they get careful too. They cover the tracks. They put the mask back on. But if you let them believe you're exactly the foolish, powerless thing they decided you were, they will walk straight to the edge of the cliff and dance there, certain no one is watching. So she dusted, she polished, she said, "Yes, ma'am," and she let Charlotte Whitfield believe she had found the perfect fall guy. The night of the gala came in warm and golden. The lawns were strung with lights. The string quartet played on the terrace. Naomi worked the floor in her gray uniform, carrying trays, refilling water, invisible in the way the staff are always invisible to people who have never had to serve. She watched the emerald catch the chandelier light at Charlotte's throat, and she watched the clock. At 9:52, Charlotte excused herself from the head table to freshen up and went up the back staircase that the staff used. Naomi marked it. At 10:21, Charlotte came back down, radiant, laughing, with her hand on a senator's arm, and the emerald at her throat was the emerald, or looked like it, because by then Naomi was nearly certain the stone on Charlotte's collarbone was a synthetic and the real one was already gone, already moved, already on its way to becoming $3 million of insurance money the Whitfields could not survive without. At 10:58, Charlotte slipped away again, alone this time, toward the dressing room off the master suite. At 11:09, the scream came down the staircase. It was a beautiful scream. Naomi noted that too. Pitched and theatrical, the scream of a woman who had practiced misery without knowing she was practicing it. Charlotte came down the stairs with mascara streaking one hand at her bare throat, the necklace gone, sobbing that someone had been in her room, someone had taken it, someone had taken her ring. The quartet stopped mid-phrase. 300 faces turned. Preston Whitfield rose from his chair looking baffled and a little gray. "Charlotte, what?" "It's gone." She gripped his arm. "The emerald, Preston, it's gone. Somebody took it out of my room, somebody who knew where it was." And then her eyes, swollen and theatrical, swept the room and landed, with the precision of an arrow that knows exactly where the target stands, on the young woman in gray by the dessert table. "Her." Charlotte raised her finger. "I sent her up to bring me my wrap. 20 minutes ago she was in my dressing room." Naomi had not been sent for anything. She had been on the ballroom floor in front of 40 witnesses for the entire evening. But she felt the air change. She felt the way 300 well-bred faces, so liberal and so kind in the abstract, did the small, involuntary thing they did when a wealthy white woman in tears pointed at a black woman in a uniform. She felt them decide. Curtis Vance, the estate's security director, stepped out of the crowd with the smooth timing of a man who had rehearsed his cue. "Mr. Whitfield, I pulled the corridor camera. Miss Hale was on the second floor at 10:54. It was a lie, a clean, prepared, confident lie, and Naomi understood in that instant that Vance was the second half of the operation, the man who moved the stone and faked the footage, paid out of a desperation he probably told himself was loyalty. The deputy was crossing the floor now. Phones were up everywhere, recording, and Charlotte's voice rose into the chandeliers. "Search her, arrest her, that's $3 million, that's my grandmother's ring," and the deputy reached for his cuffs. Naomi held her hands out in front of her, wrists together, calm as still water. "Filthy thief," is not what Charlotte said. What Charlotte said was worse and quieter, leaning close so only Naomi could hear it under the noise. "You people always think you can take what isn't yours." And the young housekeeper looked at her, the way she used to look across an interview table at someone who had just told a lie they didn't yet know was the last free thing they'd ever say, and she said nothing at all. She let the metal close on her wrists. She let the deputy walk her out through 300 staring faces and into the warm night and the back of a cruiser. She did not protest. She did not cry. Because she understood that Charlotte Whitfield had just done, in front of 200 phones and a sheriff's deputy, the one thing Naomi could never have forced her to do. She had put it on the record. The county sheriff's substation in Marshall was a low brick building with fluorescent lights and bad coffee, and Naomi sat in the interview room with her cuffed hands resting on the table and waited the way she had waited her whole life. The detective who came in was younger than her, sharp-eyed, a woman named Detective Reyes, who had clearly been pulled out of bed and was already irritated at being handed a celebrity theft on a Saturday night. Reyes dropped a folder on the table and sat down hard. Naomi Hale, you want to tell me where the ring is, or you want to make this difficult? Detective Reyes, Naomi said, before you ask me another question, I'd like you to do 4 things, and I'd like you to do them in order. Reyes blinked. The tone was wrong. Suspects didn't talk like that. Suspects begged or stonewalled. This woman in the housekeeping uniform sounded like she was running the room. Excuse me. 1. Naomi laid her cuffed hands flat. The stone Charlotte Whitfield was wearing tonight, the one she reported stolen, was a lab-grown emerald. A hydrothermal synthetic. Good one, but the inclusions are wrong, and the refractive read will be off the moment a gemologist looks at it under a loupe. The real Whitfield emerald left this estate days ago. I'd start by asking Curtis Vance which storage unit he's renting in Warrenton under the name of a Shell LLC, because he opened it in April and paid cash. Reyes's pen stopped moving. 2. Charlotte Whitfield filed a loss notification with Sterling Fidelity, her insurer, 3 days before tonight's gala, before the theft she just reported to your deputy. I have a photograph of that filing with the timestamp. Reporting a loss before it happens is not grief, detective. It's fraud. And because the policy underwriting and the wire moved across state lines through a New York carrier, it's federal fraud. The room had gone very quiet. Reyes was no longer irritated. She was leaning forward. 3. The Whitfields are insolvent, not poor, insolvent. 2 second mortgages on a property that was free and clear, a margin call from December that hasn't cleared, and a judgment from a hedge fund that they've been hiding from the foundation board. The household books show it if you know where to look, and I do, because I've been keeping them for 2 months. They didn't lose an emerald. They liquidated one and needed a thief to make the math work. I was the thief they picked, because I'm new and I'm broke and I'm black, and they were certain no one in this county would take my word over hers. Reyes set the pen down entirely. And 4. Naomi looked at her steadily. Everything I've just told you, I can prove. The synthetic stone, the storage unit, the insurance filing, the financial trail. It's documented, time-stamped, and backed up to 3 separate places, one of which is a cloud account that mirrors automatically and that I cannot delete from this room even if you ask me to. A copy of every file went out 40 minutes ago, the moment the deputy put me in the car, to a former colleague of mine. His name is Marcus Webb. He's a supervisory special agent with IRS Criminal Investigation, field office in Richmond. I worked with him for 4 years before I left the service. By now, he's already pulled a policy. By the time you decide whether to charge me, detective, this is going to have a federal case number on it, and your name will be on the report as the officer who either helped or got in the way. The silence stretched. Reyes looked at her, this woman in the gray uniform with the cuffs on her wrists, and something in her face rearranged itself as she understood what she was actually looking at. You were a federal agent. 6 years, Naomi said. Financial crimes. I put away people a lot smarter than Charlotte Whitfield. She glanced down at the cuffs. She just didn't know that the woman she decided to ruin used to do this for a living. Detective Reyes stood up. She picked up the folder she would not be needing. She walked to the door, opened it, and said something to the deputy outside, low and fast. Then she came back, and for a long moment she just looked at Naomi Hale. I owe you an apology, she said. Naomi shook her head. You don't. You did your job the way you were trained. You followed the report you were given. She paused. The people who owe me an apology, she said quietly, are about to be very busy. The cuffs came off at 1:40 in the morning. By dawn, a judge in Fauquier County had signed 3 search warrants, and a 4th came down from a federal magistrate before the courthouse coffee was cold. The storage unit in Warrenton held the real Whitfield emerald, the genuine $3.2 million stone, wrapped in a chamois cloth inside a fireproof box, exactly where Naomi said it would be, leased to a shell company that traced back to Curtis Vance in 9 minutes flat. The synthetic was confirmed by a gemologist by Tuesday. The insurance filing was confirmed by Sterling Fidelity's own records, which showed the pre-dated loss notice and, worse for Charlotte, an email she had sent the carrier from her personal account walking through the theft 2 days before it occurred, written in the careless, certain hand of a woman who had never once imagined being caught. Curtis Vance, looking at 20 years and a wife and 2 kids, did what desperate men do when the floor opens. He talked. He gave them the timeline, the planning, the moment in the dressing room, the swap. He gave them Charlotte and the financial forensics that Marcus Webb's team ran in the weeks that followed. Gave them Preston too, because it turned out the husband had not been merely baffled at that gala. He had signed the mortgages and approved the scheme and let his wife do the screaming. Charlotte Whitfield was charged with insurance fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and filing a false police report. Preston was charged alongside her. The trial took the better part of a year, and the county that had once treated a Whitfield's word as law watched the magazine photographer's pictures of the gala turn into evidence. Charlotte got 6 years in federal prison. Preston got 4. The estate, leveraged to the rafters and now drowning in legal fees, went to the bank that had been waiting 20 years to take it. The senator stopped returning their calls. The museum boards quietly removed 2 names from 2 plaques. And there was one more thing. The thing the law does too rarely and should do far more: restitution. The court ordered the Whitfields to pay Naomi Hale for what they had tried to do to her. The wages, the legal exposure, the calculated attempt to put an innocent woman in a cage to cover their debts. They would not give her back the night she spent in handcuffs in front of 300 people. Money never gives that back. But it was an acknowledgement, written into a federal sentencing order, that what they did had a victim, and the victim had a name, and the name was hers. Naomi did not gloat. People who have actually known loss almost never do. She used the restitution and a small business loan to do the only thing she had ever truly wanted to do after the badge, which was to stop watching other people's money and start building something of her own. She opened a small bookkeeping and forensic accounting practice in a storefront in Warrenton, 2 rooms and a coffee pot that worked. Her clients were mostly people the big firms would never look at twice. A church that had been robbed by its own treasurer. A widow whose late husband's business partner was cooking the books. The kind of people who get cheated precisely because everyone assumes they're too small to fight back. She hired as her first employee a 19-year-old girl from Marshall who was sharp with numbers and had no money for college and reminded Naomi of someone. On the wall of the new office she hung 3 things in a careful row: the diploma, the photograph with the gold seal, and the snapshot of a man with an easy grin and a fishing rod squinting into a sun that no longer set on him, but somehow, on certain mornings, still seemed to be warming the room. A reporter who'd covered the trial sent her a message once it was all over. Some version of, "You must have wanted to tell that woman exactly who you were, that first day she looked down her nose at you. Why didn't you?" Naomi thought about that for a while before she answered. She did not win because she had once carried a federal badge. The badge had been gone for 2 years. She won because, long before the badge, growing up in a place that taught her early how little her word would weigh against the word of someone with money, she had learned the lesson that almost nobody learns in time. Dignity is not something that powerful people hand to you. You will wait forever if you wait for that. Dignity is the thing you keep, quietly, by documenting, by remembering, by showing up and doing the work and keeping the record running until the day the truth catches up to the lie. And the truth does catch up. It always has. They'd only ever needed someone patient enough to keep the tape roll in while everyone else looked away. So here's what stays with me about all of it. Now that the dust is settled and the estate has new owners and Charlotte Whitfield is counting years in a place where nobody cares what gown she's wearing. We live in a world that tells you to hit back the second you're disrespected. That silence is weakness. That if you don't clap back fast and loud, you lose. And Naomi Hale's story says the exact opposite. Sometimes the strongest thing in the room is the person who decides not to react yet, because the moment you show a liar that you see them, they get careful. They cover their tracks and fix their mask, but if you let them believe you're as small and powerless as they've decided you are, they'll relax. They'll get bold, and they will walk you straight to the spot where they bury themselves. You don't have to dig the hole. You just have to hand them the shovel and step back and let them do the rest. That's the hardest thing in the world to do because the ego wants to settle the score this minute. But someone who didn't respect you on day one is not going to start respecting you because you explained yourself a little louder. So if there's somebody in your life right now leaning on you because they think you don't matter, Think about the woman in the gray uniform who folded her hands and held out her wrists and waited. The one still standing when it was over wasn't the loudest. She was just the one who refused to set herself on fire to keep a liar warm. If you were in Naomi's shoes that night, knowing everything she knew, holding everything she held, would you have had the patience to wait, or would you have spoken up the moment you saw the trap and let them slip away? Sit with that one. The answer tells you more about yourself than it does about her. I keep coming back to the moment the cuffs closed on Naomi Hale's wrists, because that was the moment Charlotte Whitfield thought she had won. She had the room, the money, the tears, the 300 faces deciding which woman to believe, and she lost anyway, not because the universe stepped in to balance a scale, but because of a simpler, harder truth I've watched play out my whole life. What you build in private decides what you survive in public. Charlotte's downfall wasn't bad luck. It was the exact shape of the choices she made. She lied because lying had always been cheaper than honesty for her, and the lie grew until it needed a victim, and the victim happened to be the one person in the house who had spent years learning to read exactly the kind of paper trail Charlotte left behind. Cause and effect. You can't plant a thing and act surprised when it comes up looking like what you planted. What stays with me about Naomi is that the part of her that beat Charlotte had nothing to do with the badge she used to carry. It was three quieter things she'd been building since long before any of this. The first was that she refused to become what was done to her. She had every reason to cut corners, to lie back, to take a little off the top of an estate run by people who treated her like furniture. She didn't. When the moment came, her hands were clean, and clean hands are the only ones strong enough to point. The second was the way she kept her head when everyone wanted her to lose it. She didn't mistake being loud for being right. She watched. She counted. She understood the game while the people in it still thought she was too small to follow along. That kind of clear thinking isn't something you're born with. You sharpen it, one hard situation at a time. And the third was plain endurance. She had already buried a husband and a career, and she got up at 4:40 in the morning anyway, and did honest work in a gray uniform, and she waited out a liar without burning herself down in the meantime. Patience like that isn't passive. It's the most active thing in the world. So if there's anything I'd want someone to carry out of Naomi's story, it isn't a fantasy about getting even. It's that you have a say in who you'll be when your own gala night comes, and it will come for all of us in some form. Stay honest when it costs you. Stay clear-eyed when everyone around you is screaming, and stay standing long enough for the truth to catch up, because it always does, and the only question is whether you're still on your feet when it arrives.